This convertible may look like just another midlife crisis. Red, loud, and a little too shiny for its own good. But it is not what you think. Because that car, it got me arrested. And not for speeding, not for breaking any traffic law, but for existing in the wrong driveway under the wrong set of neighborhood watchful eyes. If you're watching this from your garage, maybe while detailing your own pride and joy, or hiding out from an HOA meeting filled with nonsense about shrub height regulations, stick around. Because the story I am about to tell you is not just about a car. It is about power, prejudice, and what happens when one woman's obsession with control backfires spectacularly. My name is Dean Morgan, and until 2 months ago, I thought the only battles I would be fighting in my new neighborhood were with leaf blowers and recycling bins. But the day I pulled in my driveway with my newly restored '68 Shelby GT500, the one I had spent 4 years building bolt by bolt, was the day everything changed. Within hours, I was being labeled a threat to public safety. Within days, I was sitting in the back of a police cruiser, handcuffed, while my neighbors watched from their lawns like it was Saturday night entertainment. All because of Karen Ellsworth, the self-declared queen of the HOA, and her warped crusade to keep the neighborhood pure. They say every man has his version of sanctuary. For some, it is the woods. For others, it is a cabin or a corner office or the quiet hum of a well-lit garage. For me, it was a 1968 Shelby GT500, cherry red with matte black racing stripes and a body line that looked like it was sculpted by thunder. I had spent 4 years of weekends and every spare dollar building her from a stripped-down frame I found in a dusty Ohio barn. My name is Dean Morgan. I am 44, divorced, no kids, just a man who once worked 12-hour shifts running a software startup and finally cashed out after an acquisition that made the last 2 decades worth it. I did not want the yachts or the marble kitchen islands. What I wanted was freedom and peace. After the divorce, I decided to leave the city and find a place where the roads were quiet, the neighbors nodded politely, and I could finally hear my own thoughts. The community was called Cedar Springs Estates, a gated suburban paradise nestled in the hills just outside Austin. Brick homes with symmetrical hedges, mailboxes that matched the streetlights, and glossy brochures promising community, quiet, and quality of life. It looked like the kind of place you could settle into and maybe, just maybe, start over. I bought a corner lot with a 3-car garage and views of the treetops. The HOA rules were strict, but I read them, respected them, and followed every single one. I even had my car transporter deliver the Shelby on a weekday morning. No engine revving, no attention. Just me and my dream rolling silently into my new driveway. But that silence didn't last. It was a Saturday afternoon when it happened, 2 weeks after I moved in. The sun was high, the sky is spotless blue, and I had just pulled the GT500 out for her first full spin in the open. I was not speeding. I was not weaving or gunning it down the cul-de-sac. Just a slow cruise down the winding roads surrounding the development. Windows down, hands steady on the wheel. It was the kind of joy people write songs about. When I returned, I parked in the driveway and grabbed a microfiber cloth and a bottle of detailing spray. The car still had a little road dust, and wiping her down was my ritual, my meditation. That was when I heard the voice. Sharp, clipped, meant to cut. Excuse me, excuse me. I turned and saw her for the first time. Mid-50s, hair frozen in a blonde bob that defied gravity and reason. Tennis visor, white sneakers that looked too clean for the outdoors, and a clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. "You can't do that here," she barked, stepping off the sidewalk and into my driveway like it belonged to her. I stood up slowly, wiping my hands on the cloth. "Good afternoon," I said, offering a smile. "I'm Dean. Just moved in a couple weeks ago. Can I help you with something?" Her eyes scanned the car like it was radioactive. Street racing is strictly prohibited in this community. We don't allow performance vehicles that disturb the peace or lower property values. "Street what?" I blinked. "Ma'am, I wasn't racing. Just took her around the loop and back. Speed limit the whole time." She crossed her arms, ignoring my calm. "That vehicle has no place in a community like this. It's illegal racing equipment." Modified exhaust. Unsafe for suburban roads. The sound alone is a violation. I've already submitted a complaint. Hier. Not angry. Not yet. More stunned than anything. This is a classic car, I said carefully. Fully street legal. Registered. Insured. I've got the paperwork if you'd like to see it. She waved a dismissive hand. Save it for the citation review board. I've already alerted the HOA. You'll be hearing from us. Us. Not me. Us. As in the Homeowners Association. A collective wielded like a club. Okay, I said, nodding slowly. Well, thanks for the heads up. She lingered for a moment longer, glaring at the vehicle like it had just insulted her heritage, then turned on her heel and marched off down the sidewalk. I watched her go, the back of her polo shirt stitched with a tiny cedar tree and the initial seats HOA underneath. That evening, I received the first email. A formal notice of violation from the Cedar Springs Estates HOA, citing me for unauthorized vehicle display, noise pollution violation, code 4.13, improper use of driveway for maintenance activity, curfew violation for engine use after 6 p.m., even though it was 5:15. Each item carried a $100 fine due in 10 business days, with threat of escalation to legal action or forced towing. I read it 3 times. It was absurd. All of it. I double-checked the HOA handbook. There was no mention of curfew restrictions on engine use. The maintenance activity clause referred to oil spills and mechanical work, not wiping down a clean car. And unauthorized vehicle display. My own driveway. I sent a polite email in response, attaching photos and timestamps and citing the specific passages in the rulebook that contradicted their claims. The reply came 48 hours later. We appreciate your concern. However, the HOA reserves the right to interpret the intent of community guidelines for the well-being of all residents. Your vehicle, in both appearance and function, is deemed disruptive to the Cedar Springs atmosphere. Further violations may result in civil action. Disruptive. The word thudded in my chest like a slow punch. The next morning, I found a printed version of the violation notice pinned under my windshield wiper, laminated, complete with a red second warning stamped diagonally across the front. That was when it clicked. This wasn't about rules. This was about me, what I drove, how I looked, how I did not fit. Karen wasn't acting alone. She had an entire rule book to hide behind and a board full of enablers who saw my car as a threat to their perfectly beige way of life. And she was only just getting started. At first, I thought it was overkill. Maybe Karen had made her point and would move on. Maybe filing her complaint, pinning that laminated violation on my windshield, and stomping back into her fortress of manicured superiority was her way of establishing dominance. But I was wrong. It was just the beginning. Over the next 10 days, the citations started multiplying like weeds. Day 1. HOA notice for excessive tire marks on my own concrete driveway. Black rubber residue, the letter claimed, posed a visual nuisance and safety hazard. Day 3. Violation for engine idling intimidation. I had started the Shelby for less than 2 minutes to pull it into the garage. Apparently, the sound startled neighborhood pets and senior residents. Day 5. Citation for property vibrations. No explanation, just that oscillating mechanical activity was disrupting peace and quiet. That one made me laugh, until I realized they were dead serious. The strangest one came next. A formal request to remove the vehicle entirely from the premises until it could pass an HOA aesthetic compatibility evaluation. They even enclosed a form to request permanent relocation of the car to an off-site garage, suggesting it might be better suited to a more industrial setting. Each violation added another $100. My total fines crossed $700 in less than 2 weeks. I called the HOA's legal line. Straight to voicemail. I emailed. No reply. Then, on a rainy Wednesday evening, everything escalated beyond absurdity. I had just returned from a late dinner in town. It was 9:12 p.m. I remember the time because I always documented it, just in case. I pulled slowly into my driveway. Second gear, no revving, lights low. As I stepped out of the car, headlights hit me. A second later, red and blue strobes lit up the street. Mr. Dean Morgan? The officer asked, stepping out his cruiser. Yes. You're under arrest for disturbing the peace and failure to comply with a community safety mandate. I blinked. Excuse me. He read me my rights, cuffed me, and placed me in the back seat. My neighbors peeked through blinds. Porch lights blinked on. The cop's dash cam captured everything. Me, confused, calm, cuffed for existing with the wrong kind of car in the wrong kind of neighborhood. At the station, I was told there were 4 sworn statements from residents claiming I had been drag racing through the subdivision earlier that evening. I hadn't even left the house until after 8 p.m. I had receipts from the restaurant to prove it. But the reports were filed, and my word wasn't enough. I spent the night in a holding cell with a man who reeked of whiskey and shouted nonsense in his sleep. The next morning, I posted bail. The charges were eventually dropped, but not before the local HOA message board was flooded with threads titled, "Should car collectors be allowed in family communities? Is Mr. Morgan a threat to our kids' safety?" When I got home, I found a pink flyer on my door. HOA Emergency Meeting. Topic: Vehicle violations and community safety concerns. I stood there in the rain, flyer in hand, shirt still creased from the jail-issued jumpsuit, and thought, this isn't about a car. This is about control. That night, I opened the HOA bylaws for the first time in full. I read every single line. Then I read between them. I discovered that Karen Ellsworth had rewritten over 18 amendments to HOA policies in her 3 years as president. Many of them created vague community harmony clauses, giving the board full discretion over activities, aesthetics, and noise. That is when I found something deeper. The citations, the fake statements, the emergency meeting, they were part of a pattern, and I was not the only one caught in it. I remember the guy down the block with the black Jeep Wrangler who suddenly stopped parking it outside. The retired vet with the Harley who moved out a month after moving in. The young couple with the food truck license plate who got fined for commercial presence. I began reaching out. Quiet conversations at the coffee shop. DMs on the neighborhood app. Notes passed between mailboxes. Within a week, I had spoken to 5 other residents who had received nearly identical treatment. Low vehicles. Colorful paint jobs. Anyone who deviated from Karen's pastel parade of tastefully muted conformity became a target. One man, a mechanic, said he was fined for industrial odors because he worked on his son's motorcycle in the garage. Another woman, a DJ, was cited for non-traditional residential rhythm pollution after hosting a birthday party with music at reasonable volume. Karen's HOA wasn't about maintaining property value. It was about gatekeeping, about keeping people like us on the defensive until we either conformed or left. I was done playing defense. I once ran a tech company that specialized in supply chain intelligence. In simple terms, I made a career out of spotting unseen patterns, untangling networks, and finding the one weak thread that could unravel an entire empire. Karen Ellsworth had no idea who she was up against. After the arrest, I went quiet. No more car shows. No more driveway detailing. No more emails to the HOA. I even started driving a rental Camry, just to avoid attention. On the surface, I looked like a man defeated. But beneath that quiet, I was building a case. And I was pissed. It started with an offhand comment from Lucas, the Jeep owner I had quietly spoken to the week before. He mentioned his Wrangler had mysteriously disappeared from his driveway after a 3rd violation notice. No warning. No knock on the door. Just gone. When he called the towing number left on a pink slip taped to his mailbox, the receptionist said the company had exclusive HOA enforcement authorization. She also let slip that the truck had been dispatched by a Karen Ellsworth. I dug into the tow company. Arrow Ridge Enforcement and Recovery. Family-owned. Tiny operation, but weirdly well-connected in suburban HOA contracts across 3 counties. Public records showed the owner was Franklin Ellsworth, Karen's brother-in-law. I cross-referenced his company's start date with the HOA board minutes. Sure enough, 6 weeks after Karen became president, the HOA voted to terminate their previous towing vendor and grant Arrow Ridge exclusive rights. The motion passed by a 3-2 vote. Karen cast the tiebreaker. Shady, but not illegal. So I went deeper. I pulled every HOA amendment passed in the last 3 years, public record but not posted on the website. Took me 3 separate requests to the board's records officer, who conveniently forgot to include the newer revisions the first 2 times. What I found read like a blueprint for authoritarianism. Karen had quietly added subjective enforcement clauses that let her fine residents for perceived threats to tranquility, aesthetic imbalance, and my personal favorite, non-compliant vehicular presence. Most of these amendments were emergency addendums passed without full community votes, justified under a vague clause about rapidly evolving community dynamics. It was nonsense, and it was deeply flawed, because in my next trip to the city zoning office, I found something Karen had either missed or thought no one would catch. The roads in Cedar Springs Estates? They weren't owned by the HOA. They were city-maintained public roads, meaning the HOA had no legal jurisdiction over what vehicles could be parked, driven, or even revved on those streets. Every citation I'd received, every notice, every threatened fine was based on a fundamental lie. And now I had the documentation to prove it. The citations? Legally unenforceable. The arrest? Triggered by falsified neighbor signatures, all of which had eerily similar handwriting, spacing, and ink type. The towing? Authorized by a private contract that violated municipal towing ordinances because HOA enforcement only applied to privately owned property. I spent the next 2 weeks assembling a war chest. First, I purchased a pocket recorder and began documenting every HOA interaction, including the random compliance checks that increased after I stopped responding to violation letters. Second, I created a private online portal for the residents I had spoken to, the mechanic, the DJ, the Jeep owner, and several others who had since come forward. I gave each of them a survey to document what citations they'd received, when, and how they were delivered. A pattern began to emerge. All non-compliant vehicles belonged to newer residents. 60% of those fined were people of color or owned small businesses. Over 80% of the violation notices were hand-delivered, not mailed. Nearly all came from the same email address, kate@ellsworth@seaboard.org, despite HOA bylaws requiring a vote before issuing fines above $250. Next, I reached out to a civil rights attorney named Tarek Owens, a friend of a friend who specialized in HOA discrimination cases. We met at a diner 2 towns over. He listened to everything. The arrest, the citations, the connections to her brother-in-law's towing company, the city road records. He didn't blink once. When I finally stopped talking, he leaned forward and said, "You're sitting on a class action lawsuit." He explained that HOAs, despite being private associations, cannot violate state and municipal laws or civil rights protections. Karen's amendments, the towing, the false arrest, they crossed multiple legal boundaries. But more importantly, he told me something that lit a fuse in my mind. HOAs hate bad press more than lawsuits. If you want to break them, don't sue first. Expose them. So I began crafting a strategy with 2 tracks. Legal. Tarek began preparing the case quietly, drafting a civil rights claim and filing open records requests to confirm HOA board financials, towing kickbacks, and city permits. Media. I called up a reporter I knew from my tech days, Kayla Reese, an investigative journalist with Austin News Now. She loved HOA corruption stories. I pitched her a lead. Man gets arrested over sports car. HOA power abuse exposed. She bid immediately, but I warned her everything needed to stay off the record until the timing was right. We had to wait until Karen fully committed herself to the lie. Meanwhile, I kept collecting receipts. I wired small cameras on the exterior of my garage and porch. I caught Karen and a board member photographing my trash cans and taking notes on a clipboard. I recorded audio of her threatening another resident with fines if she kept hanging around that Mustang guy. Every detail went into the folder I called Project Overdrive. The goal wasn't just to win. It was to break her stranglehold on the entire neighborhood. Not through confrontation, not through revenge, through exposure. By week 3, I had 14 resident testimonies, 5 confirmed instances of wrongful towing, 2 cases where Karen had denied pool access to residents with visible tattoos, citing non-family-friendly appearance. One neighbor, a young mother named Rosa, revealed she was fined $300 for excessive porch activity. Translation: her kids played with chalk on the steps. I scheduled the interview with Kayla. We met at a nondescript studio on the outskirts of Austin. She had a small team with her: camera operator, legal consultant, and a producer. I brought the documents, audio clips, video footage, and a printed copy of every violation I had received. We filmed for 3 hours. By the end, her expression had shifted from intrigued to furious. "You realize," she said, flipping through the papers, "this is a bombshell. I'm counting on it." Now the countdown had begun. Karen had no idea the clock was ticking. She continued issuing violations, continued harassing newcomers. She was planning a community safety fair to push a new vehicle regulation amendment meant to ban all modified or non-standard vehicles from overnight parking. The amendment required a board vote and a 2/3 resident majority. But she was already preparing to bypass it with her favorite loophole: emergency executive privilege. Perfect. Let her overreach. Let her file one more illegal fine. Let her raise her gavel just once more. Because when the time came, the gavel would come crashing down on her. And it would not be mine doing the swinging. The Cedar Springs Estates clubhouse smelled like lemon polish and nervous ambition. Fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of folding chairs, all neatly arranged before the elevated dais where the HOA board sat like local monarchs presiding over a civil inquisition. Karen Ellsworth stood at the podium, her crisp white blouse ironed to militant perfection, a faux warm smile stretched across her face. "Tonight's emergency session," she announced, voice syrupy but sharp, "is in response to escalating concerns regarding vehicle-related disturbances, aesthetic disharmony, and resident safety." Behind her, a large vinyl banner read, "Maintaining community harmony through vehicle regulation." I stood in the back row, silent, watching. Beside me stood 3 people. Tarek Owens, my civil rights attorney, clad in a sleek gray suit and calm as ever. To his left was Brenda McAllister, a city zoning officer with a fat folder of public roadmaps. And behind them, barely blending in with the other attendees, stood Kayla Reese and her 2-person camera crew. They weren't filming yet. Not until I gave the nod. Karen continued. "As you know," she said, tapping a stack of printed proposals, "our board has drafted Amendment 11.3, which restricts parking, use, or operation of vehicles with visible modifications, non-factory exhausts, or non-standard engine output within Cedar Springs Estates. These changes are vital to preserving property value and ensuring community safety." Applause erupted from a section of her loyalists, same faces I'd seen circling HOA meetings like lapdogs. Others looked unsure, whispering. A few glanced at me, raising eyebrows. And, Karen added, "In accordance with emergency provisions, this measure may bypass general vote pending board approval and community necessity." That was my cue. I stepped forward, walked to the center aisle, and spoke loud enough to halt her next sentence. "With all due respect, I'd like to address the board." Karen froze. "Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice now dipped in poison, "this is a board-conducted session. Comments are reserved for the open floor period." "This isn't a comment," I said. "It's a correction and a legal notice." Tarek stepped forward, handing a thick envelope to the board secretary. Karen's eyes narrowed. "What is this?" "A formal notice of pending civil litigation," Tarek said smoothly, "including claims of wrongful arrest, defamation of character, civil rights violations, and racially discriminatory enforcement policies by this HOA and its officers." Gasps rippled through the room. Even the people in polos and pastel khakis sat up straight. Karen tried to recover. "This is outrageous." "Is it?" I said, turning to the crowd. "Because what's outrageous is being handcuffed in your own driveway for owning a car. What's outrageous is an HOA president creating policies to harass residents who don't look like her, drive like her, or live like her." I nodded to Brenda, the zoning officer. She approached the board, pulling out a map. "I've been asked to provide clarification," she said professionally, "on road ownership within Cedar Springs Estates. These roads," she tapped the color-coded lines, "are not HOA property. They're public maintained by the city, which means HOA jurisdiction does not extend to regulating traffic, parking, or vehicle presence beyond what's dictated by city ordinance. Karen's mouth twitched. "This can't be accurate," she muttered. "It's from the city planning office," Brenda said, raising an eyebrow. "Dated, certified, and filed under zoning map CR 271B. You're welcome to contest it through formal government channels." From behind me, Kayla's cameraman powered up the mic. The soft hum of the live feed cut the silence like a buzz saw. Karen's voice sharpened. "This man is trying to undermine the HOA's authority using bureaucratic loopholes." "No," I said calmly. "I'm exposing a fraud. Let's talk about Arrow Ridge towing." Tarek stepped beside me again, flipping open a folder. Records show that the HOA's towing contract was granted to a company owned by Ms. Ellsworth's brother-in-law. Since that change, towing activity has disproportionately targeted residents of color, renters, and small business owners. No competitive bidding. No resident vote. Just executive privilege. More whispers. Louder this time. "That's a lot." Karen snapped. "I disclosed that relationship when the contract was approved." "There's no record of such disclosure in the board minutes," Tarek said. "But even if there was, the financial link creates a direct conflict of interest, especially when residents are being towed under fabricated violations." Karen turned to the rest of the board, seeking backup. But her allies were sweating now, visibly squirming. One leaned away as if her seat had become radioactive. I pressed forward. "Look, this isn't about a car anymore. This is about abuse of power. About using an HOA not to protect a neighborhood, but to control it. You try to erase people like me from this community. You almost did." I looked around the room, locking eyes with Rosa, the young mother who had been fined for porch activity, with Lucas, who had been forced to sell his Jeep, with Mrs. Patel, whose son was threatened for riding a bike deemed unsafe. You almost silenced us, but we're done hiding. Tonight, I'm also announcing the launch of a new organization, the Cedar Springs Resident Advocacy Alliance. We're a legal support and education group dedicated to protecting residents from HOA overreach, discrimination, and abuse. We're backed by attorneys, civil rights watchdogs, and press coverage. I looked directly at Karen, and we're just getting started. The room exploded. Some clapped. Some stood. One older man shouted, "About damn time." Karen banged her gavel, demanding order, but it only added to the chaos. Then Brenda stepped up once more. "There's more," she said. "Given the public nature of these roads and the pending investigation into HOA overreach, the city is suspending Cedar Springs HOA's enforcement privileges, pending review. No further citations, fines, or regulatory changes can be issued until legal clarity is restored." Karen's hand clenched the podium so tightly her knuckles paled. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You did it to yourself," I replied. Kayla stepped forward now, her mic catching everything. "Would you like to comment on the lawsuits, Ms. Ellsworth? Or your connection to Arrow Ridge towing?" "I have nothing to say," Karen snapped. "You will," I said, under oath. As I left the room, I heard murmurs behind me. Not fear, not doubt, but momentum. Something had shifted in that meeting, not just in policy, but in power. Karen had lost the room. And the board? They were already looking for the exit. Karen Ellsworth resigned in a fury 2 weeks after the emergency meeting. Her carefully crafted facade, preservation of harmony, defender of community values, collapsed under the weight of lawsuits, city investigations, and public outrage. No farewell speech. No gratitude for her service. Just a typed notice posted on the HOA board and a moving truck that showed up quietly one morning before dawn. She was gone. But the real victory came not in her exit, but in what followed. The HOA board was placed under a full audit. Every policy passed in the last 5 years was suspended for legal review. The towing contract with Arrow Ridge was immediately terminated. And for the first time in the community's history, the HOA meetings were open to full resident participation, with live minutes posted online within 24 hours. The city went even further. After Brenda's report and Kayla's explosive segment aired on local news, The city council passed new legislation requiring municipal oversight for any HOA enforcement action involving law enforcement. In simple terms, no HOA could weaponize police power without due process and verified evidence. As for me, my arrest record was formally expunged. The citations? Nullified. The fines? Refunded. The HOA was forced to issue a written apology, signed by the interim president and submitted to the local paper as part of a settlement agreement. But my life didn't return to what it was before. It evolved. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. So I turned my attention to others like me, residents across the county who had been bullied, fined, harassed, and pushed out of neighborhoods by self-serving HOA leaders. Some had lost homes. Some had lost businesses. Most had lost hope. I started a nonprofit, Open Gates Initiative, a legal aid and advocacy group that offered free support to HOA abuse victims. We partnered with civil rights lawyers, property rights experts, and even former HOA board members who had walked away in disgust. Within 3 months, we had over 100 members from 4 different communities. And that car? That cherry red Shelby GT 500 that once got me arrested? It became something else entirely. Every Saturday morning, I opened my garage for Torque and Talk, a free clinic for local teens to learn basic car maintenance, mechanical engineering, and safe driving. We pulled engines apart. We fixed brakes. We talked about life, responsibility, and how power, mechanical or political, should be respected, not abused. For most of these kids, it was the first time anyone had trusted them with tools. Some showed up with grease under their fingernails and already knew their way around a carburetor. Others had never touched a wrench. All were welcome. The highlight of every session, a single lap around the block in the GT500. Engine rumbling, tires humming, a wide-eyed grin in the passenger seat. One of those kids, Marcus, a quiet high school senior, told me he planned to study mechanical engineering because of those weekends. "I never thought I'd be into this stuff," he said one day, wiping his hands clean. "But now I feel like I can build anything." I smiled. You can. As spring rolled in, something else started happening, quiet at first, then more often. Knocks at the door. Former Karen loyalists, people who had backed her, voted with her, sneered when I walked by. Now came looking for help. Their requests started simple. "My HOA is threatening to fine me for parking in my own driveway. Can you look at the bylaws? Do you know if the board is allowed to deny community hall access because of a birthday theme?" Then came the confessions. I didn't know what she was doing, they'd say, eyes lowered. I believed her when she said it was about rules. But it was never about rules, was it? No, I'd say gently. It was about power. And the thing about power? When misused, it eventually answers to someone. We help those neighbors, not out of spite or triumph, but because that's what justice looks like. Not just the fall of the tyrant, but the healing of the community they left behind. One evening, I hosted a small gathering at my place. Nothing fancy, just barbecue, some lawn chairs, and good conversation. Residents from across Cedar Springs came, many of them meeting one another without Karen's curtain of fear between them for the first time. Kids played in the yard. Teenagers tinkered with a rebuilt lawnmower in my driveway and parked proudly beside the curb, in full view of everyone. The GT500, clean, restored, untouchable. A few people still shook their heads at the noise. That was okay, because most smiled, nodded. One even whispered, "Funny how that car started a movement." I didn't correct her, because it was true. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a symbol of what happens when one person decides not to be intimidated. When someone says, "Enough," and then does something about it. Not with fists, but with facts. Not with shouting, but with strategy. Not by becoming the next bully, but by flipping the system on its head and leaving the door open behind him. So if you're ever told you don't belong, if someone uses policy to punish you for being loud, different, or unapologetically yourself, remember this. Every revolution needs a spark. Sometimes that spark sounds a lot like a 428 Cobra Jet V8 roaring back to life. Sometimes all it takes is one loud engine to expose how broken the system really is. I never set out to be a rebel. I just wanted peace, a place to build something beautiful with my own hands. But when the rules are written by people more interested in control than community, even something as harmless as a restored car becomes a threat. That was the moment I realized silence protects bullies. Compliance enable corruption. And when you're targeted for being different, too loud, too bold, too visible, your very presence becomes resistance. I did not fight back with fists. I fought back with truth, with paper trails, with courage. I used the very rules they try to weaponize and turn them inside out. And I was not alone. That is the real power. When you stand up just once, you give others permission to do the same. If you're ever unfairly silenced, marginalized, or made to feel small in a place that was supposed to be your sanctuary, remember this. Noise is power, not the kind that disrupts for attention, but the kind that echoes, reverberates, and awakens others. So be loud, be visible, be the reason someone else finds their voice. Because whether it is AV8 in a driveway, a question at a meeting, or a stand taken quietly in a room full of fear, every movement starts with a spark. Aim your noise in the right direction and let it roar.